Welcome to The People I Know, a philosophical podcast with and about the diverse people I've met and loved over the years as an African American female thinker, academic, artist, dancer, dog lover. Today's guest is one of my very best friends, Syl Ko. She is co-author of Aphro-ism, essays on pop culture, feminism, and Black veganism, and I hope you enjoy. I was trying to not do this in a sweatshirt, but it's cold, so this is as good as it
I
gets.
should have worn something. I mean, if I remembered I was doing this today, I would have spruced up.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so first things first, just introduce yourself. And of course, like, hey, Syl!
All right, I'm Syl.
And what titles you have, what your education is. That's what, your qualifications.
Well, I'm a paralegal. I'm not qualified for that. I just sort of applied for the job and got it because I have a philosophy background. And so we met in a philosophy program, in our master's program. And then I have a second master's in philosophy, though my thesis was different because I was in a PhD program. And along the way, you have to do a master's thesis. But then I left the last year of my PhD program. And now I'm just kind of an independent researcher, I guess you would call it. So my day job
Hmm.
is I'm a paralegal. And then my sort of second job, I don't consider it a job, it's recreational,
Yeah.
the independent researcher on animal ethics or the connections between animal ethics, decolonial thinking, history of the philosophy of science, like those kinds of things.
Awesome. And what is your bachelor's in?
I have a bachelor's in chemistry.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's not like completely unrelated because, of course, I mean, the way I got into a master's program in philosophy without having a background was because I had studied analytical chemistry, and people in analytic philosophy love anyone who does any sort of natural science kind of work. So that's how I got into the program. So I had no qualifications for that either, but I did write a writing sample. I got recommendations. I took a few classes at a community college while I was working in a lab. Which actually I originally did that because I was reading a book and I didn't understand some of it. It was more contemporary philosophy, which wasn't my thing. So I took night classes. And then when I was taking the night classes, the professors all said, you should be in philosophy. And so I said, oh, okay. And so that's what I did. So then I went to San Francisco State where they accepted me based on my science credentials. And then actually, to be honest, I really like history of philosophy of science also because
Mm.
I like science stuff. And even when I was working as a chemist, even though I was doing kind of boring pharmaceutical work or whatever, I was really interested in the history of a lot of concepts that we use in science. And then I started studying those things when I was in philosophy, though I also kind of moved into animal ethics. But the two inform each other because how we think about animals and humans have a lot to
Yeah.
do with how our ideas about science have changed.
Yeah. One of the smartest people I know. Love you. And as I had mentioned in your introduction, you're a co-author of Aphorism, essays on pop culture, feminism, and Black veganism. And Black veganism is not what anybody thinks it is. So, so that's why she's continuing to do other work here.
Yep.
Try and rectify that situation, but we can come back around to that. Okay, the stupid question. Get this out of the way first. What kind of mixed are you?
You mean like what are my ethnic background?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's how Isabel was. She was like, so what do you mean by that?
Okay. So that helps clarify. I should have got that clarification earlier because when I printed it out, I was like, what does that mean? Okay. Well, on one side, I'm like American Black. I mean, so my mother, her side is like American Black people and Native American. And on my father's side, Poland. He's from Poland. But he has some mixture because they traveled through Mongolia, blah blah blah. They have this whole thing. So on both sides, they have their own kind of thing going on. But yeah, so I'm like American Black, and then my other side, white Polacks.
And why does that matter in your life? Like when and why do you find that it matters?
Now it maybe doesn't matter so much. When I was growing up, I think it might have mattered, though I didn't see it that way
Mm.
because I actually didn't think at all about race until I was forced to in college. I went to Temple University, and at the time, and they might still have this, but at the time you had to take 2 race credits. I took one early on just to get out of the way because I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I'm a chemist. I don't have to care about race bullshit. So I did my first one, I just zoned out the entire time and just barely, slid by with like a B plus or something. And then I had to take one more. I was dreading it so much that I waited until the summer like in order to graduate, I had to take this class during the summer. That's how long I waited. And so up until then, I didn't think much about race. Like my dad always said, "You're Polish." That's what he would say, And it was always weird. We'd go to these Polish events, like the Kosciuszko parade, and people would be looking at us, and they're like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "We're Polish." I didn't even and then there'd be like those weird times, like when I was in Florida in elementary school, it was very kind of socially segregated, and I think they were trying to deal with their race issues. And so they would have this thing, and there was one day in the year they would say, okay, all the kids who are white stand up so they can do a count. Okay, so then they would count. All the kids who are black stand up. They would do a count. There
Wow.
was like one Asian person, so I, maybe they were in the same predicament as I was, because it was almost like almost like how we talk about race today. They're like, the Asians are just disappeared from the conversation. And then every single time the teacher would be like, you didn't stand up. And I was just like, because at home it wasn't like you're white or you're black, we were just like, well, we're the Ko family and we're Polish. There was no there was no vocabulary on race. And
Yeah.
so some teachers would be like, well, I don't really consider you black, I'll put you in white. And then other teachers would be like, well, I don't consider you white, so I'll put you in black. And I remember just coming home and I was completely like, I don't even know how to I don't know how to think about this. But there
Mm.
was definitely this kind of a very explicit attitude that blackness was bad in the house. And I think that's why
Mm.
my dad didn't want to venture there. And even he wouldn't even think about my mother as black. He called her mixed. And actually, I knew someone else who was like this. Whenever there was like a beautiful light skinned woman, they're like, well, she can't be black, she's because she's so
Mm.
beautiful. Like, actually, someone on our program.
Yeah. It's good to know.
Yeah. And so there was, and because of that, it was like you didn't want to be compared with a black person. You didn't think of yourself as a
Mm.
black person. I knew I wasn't white. In school,
Mm.
I would never fit in anywhere, though I think that had more to do with, you know, being ASD, which I didn't know I was until I was 26. So that didn't
Mm.
help. Everyone just knew I was just weird and bonkers, but I didn't fit in at all anyway.
Mm.
Um, and so then when I took this class that I was forced to take, my professor, he was amazing. I mean, he talked about race not in this kind of like superficial way, where the way I think we talk about it now, but he talked about it as a philosophical concept. So I was right away very attracted to how he was talking about it. And then that was the first time I remember I just came home on the first day of class and I was like, oh my God, I'm black. Like that was like the revelation that I had. And I remember my father in the background, he's like, haha, she thinks she's black. Like that was that was the thing in our house where it was just like, what's wrong with Syl? Why is she talking about being black or whatever? And so then I started to think, in this kind of more deep way for the first time,
Yeah.
and started making sense of, oh, this is why maybe I felt a certain way, and like, oh,
Mm.
now I remember when anyone was black, it was considered bad, or they were stupid, or they were ugly, or they're not civilized, they're barbaric, they're not exemplars of humanity, and then anything white was. And my dad,
Mm.
and I would start to remember my father would explicitly say, you don't bring a nigger home, you don't bring a Jew home, you don't bring a
Mm.
Chinese person home, you come with a white
Mm.
person. That was always a thing.
Mm.
Actually, to this day, all my siblings are, not my brother because he's not with anyone and probably never will be
Mm.
because of mental stuff, but all my sisters, they're with white men. And
Mm.
for a long time, that was what I thought was, was my only option. Like, you date white guys, that's it.
Mhm.
But then, especially as I got a little bit older, I started to kind of think about race a little bit differently, and I started to see how it was a very useful concept more abstractly, how it informs how we think about lots of things, not just human bodies. And then this
Mhm.
my research kind of picks up on, where I start thinking about race more kind of like the way that my professor was talking about it in this more philosophical sense. And it reminds me of how we talk about like space or time, these kinds of concepts that we don't have a definition for, but really shapes how we think about lots of different things and informs how we think about lots of different things. And for me, race started to seem more like that, especially as I started to read about the history of science, and especially as I got more into Kant, who was the first person to use that term race and to come up with a real theory of race. And I started
Mm.
saying, oh my God, the development of what we can now call natural sciences had a lot to do with what we think of when it comes to race. And it is like a byproduct of modernity. And that's what I think what people mean when they say it's a byproduct of modernity. So when I
Mm.
started thinking about it in this kind of bigger, deeper sense, I stopped thinking about it in terms of me individually as this person or that person, and started
Mhm.
actually hoping to kind of move away from that. And some of my work is like trying to move past using these kinds of things as identity markers, because it's for me a little, when I think of identity, I think of something that's much more heavy and robust. And I'm worried that we're actually clinging to these superficial, malleable categories as things that should define our core existence.
Yeah, which moves into when and why doesn't being mixed matter? When does it not matter? And this, it's because of you that I put down like the dumbasses of the world. Like,
I think it depends on who you are and what your context is. I have friends who are, who are mixed, and it matters all the time to them. I actually was at an event. It was me, another person who we would call mixed, and then like a Black person, and it was like a networking thing, a conference thing. I was one of the keynote speakers, and everyone else was pretty much white. Like there wasn't even an Asian person. I don't think there was a Native person. Everyone was white. And this one guy, he said something not quite insulting or racist, but just kind of annoying, like something like a troll would say. And whatever. And I just could. It was during Q&A, and I was like, yeah, whatever. And then I just kept answering questions. And then afterwards, the two other people who were the people of color came to me, and they're just like, oh my god, I couldn't even concentrate on anything I was doing because of what this guy said. And I didn't even remember that he had said anything, and so for them it mattered a lot, I became very aware of not being a white person at that moment, and this impaired their ability to do networking and stuff like that. I have other friends where it matters a lot, like in dating, and I've had that experience too, where you have some people who see it as exotic, and so you start to feel kind of weird, like like you don't want to feel interchangeable. We talked about this before. You don't want to feel
yeah.
so it's just like, oh, I like you because you're mixed, and or you find exotic, and you just start thinking weird. And like lots of people are mixed with, I have a friend who's German and Polish, for instance, but no one considers her mixed. It's just like so it's like we're holding on to this weird legacy of like, oh wow, this different stock, and like we're mixed into it, and it's like ooh la la, And I understand that the guy meant it as a total compliment, and like, I wasn't like doing a lecture to him or whatever, but I had that feeling where it's like, why is it that when it's like a Black person or if it's an Asian person, we start using this language of, oh, they're mixed, and then there's people, there's nobody, I don't know anybody who's like pure this ethnicity or pure that. We don't call them. Right. So it does. I mean, so it does remind you of like this really bizarre legacy about the race thinking, and like I said, I think depending on the person, it might matter a lot. Depending on how aware you are of it and how much work you've done on the internal effects of whatever ism you're dealing with. I think I've dealt with it well, and it probably helps that I sort of an ego issue. So I because people don't talk about that. Everyone, when they talk about racism or sexism or homophobia, whatever, everyone talks about the kind of spectacular version of it, the external version. Like you're lynched, you're shot by the police, you're getting your votes denied, blah blah blah, and those things are all genuinely terrible. But I think what's often overlooked is this internal version where you really start to sabotage yourself. As Steve Biko, he talked about it as the seeds of an inferiority complex are planted into that group, and then seeds of a superiority complex are planted into the dominant group. And this is useful for two reasons. One is it prevents them from ever working together, because if you have someone with a superiority complex and a person with an inferiority complex, you're not
I'm not going to working. I don't like you. I fundamentally don't like you.
Yeah, exactly. And then second of all, now you have pretty much bred this person's disadvantage inside of them. You can have a perfect society and everything, blah, blah, blah. But if you, in your formative life, your formative experiences have been you feeling less than all the time, everything on the outside can be perfect, and you're just going to fuck yourself over. And that's what I saw happening at the conference with these two women who they were so upset over some loser. This guy has no bearing on their lives at all. And they ruined a whole day, just because they were in their own heads. And I'm not saying this to shame them, but like this is the kind of work that we need to do. We need to pay more attention, I think, to that, because we can fix everything else, but if we all have inside of us this feeling that we're less than, then even if all the white people in the world are wonderful to you, if you feel inferior and you're going to sabotage yourself. And then also you won't even be able to notice when progress is made, which is, I think, is another issue. You don't even see when things are moving forward because you're so fixated on feeling down on yourself, or looking back at or calling back to those times when you were feeling bad about yourself as a kid and letting this feed your future. So
I think that's one of the reasons why, like, this, I don't want to call it this whole Black Pride movement, because I mean that's what it has been since 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and so this kind of resurgence of being proud of being brown, in all different kinds of ways. Just, I guess, being proud of being anything but white. But in particular, like, Black is beautiful. And like, my friend, she wrote a book, literally a book for Black girls. And, all of this is like part of the reason that I'm so happy about it. And a reason to recognize happiness and to be really excited about this is because it's like, it still might not be, no, it's still like the ego at work, like super ego at work. But in order to combat like the years and centuries and generations of that internalized shit, like I feel like this kind of thing is good. It's like, okay, we're gonna give you a super dose of this antibiotic, even though the bacteria is really tiny. So it's like sometimes I catch myself, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like even though I'm Black and I like seeing more products for my hair and I like seeing like these representations and stuff, like sometimes just as a movement, it gets really overwhelming and just like, I just want to talk about like dogs or something.
Yeah.
I do also recognize that it's like, no, actually this is kind of what needs to happen. And it's not just with Black people, like, seeing more Asians in film or in whatever, like seeing, more like Indians or just whoever it is. It's just like, okay, fine. Let's do this.
Yeah. Like on the one hand, I wish that stuff would just go away, like I just don't see why it should matter, like why it should matter that anyone is anything. But and I understand when people are very critical of like the Black, Black Pride movement. They're just like, why do you have to be proud of being Black? And it's like I get what they're saying in a certain sense, but they refuse to see the other side, which is
right. That's
reaction to people saying and this being reflected in society that Black is inferior. Like,
right. And actual like consequences, like physical like consequences. Like it's not like I'm trying to like say stick your head in my hair.
Yeah, like if that goes away, we wouldn't need to have this. I mean, it's not like it's important to understand these are reactionary movements. It's not like, oh, we're just randomly coming up with like, oh, we're the best, we're amazing, we're beautiful. It's just like this is a reaction to a long legacy of putting this group of people or that group of people as on the bottom. And so when people are like, oh, why should we care if like this person voices this actor or whatever? And it's like, yeah, ideally it wouldn't matter. Ideally anybody could voice anybody and anybody should be on TV. But it's weird that you only see it as political when we're putting people of color on TV, but it's not political when it's only white people on TV. That's the point. It was like, if you don't do that stuff, we wouldn't have to do this stuff. That's it.
Right.
I am at heart, I would love a post-racial world. I would love it. Everybody thinking of each other in terms of race categories. I just think it's ridiculously reductionist. I don't think it's helpful. And I'm really scared about how we are putting so much substance into it because now people, I'm afraid that people are confusing like, Black is beautiful, Black pride, confusing this with infusing an essence into race. Like when really this should be a temporary measure. Like this is a corrective for a long history of putting these people on the bottom, which we still see today, but that this is not the final answer. Like this cannot be the final answer. But in the end, it's going to have to be, we need to get rid of this idea that there are races. That's it. That doesn't mean we have to get rid of the idea that there's nations or that there's groups. I'm not against group thinking. I think group thinking is wonderful and doesn't have to be divisive, but race thinking is going to have to go away, which means we'd have to relinquish ourselves also from these pride projects. But again, as long as you have the project of maintaining dominance, you're going to have the project of trying to lift the people up who are on the bottom. So those people who are annoyed with it and want the world to be post-racial. And I agree with you. You got to first realize that you need to get rid of the dominant kind of narrative first. And so for me, I see this as like a transitional move, not like an end in itself.
The next official question is why philosophical or critical thinking matters to you. I mean, just kind of already like touched on that. Like to put it very simply, it's like because we need to.
Question I can answer. Why philosophy? Well, okay. Hold on. Let me put a star here.
I love that you have the notes there.
I don't. I should have notes. I'm trying to make notes as I'm talking. So it should be. So philosophy and critical thinking are two different things. So critical thinking is a skill set, and philosophy is a discipline in which you develop the kind of character that exemplifies what critical thinking looks like. And so both are important. And I'm going to say critical thinking just because, when you say philosophy, it can mean different things to different people, which I hate.
Oh, it's so meta.
I mean, people argue about what is philosophy. so I prefer, so if we just stick with critical thinking, so critical thinking matters to me, and I think it should matter to everyone, for, I think, like practical reasons, and then there's personal reasons. So there's practical
Mm-hmm.
benefits, there's personal benefits. So I think the first practical benefit to critical thinking is that it returns you to a space of, a simple mode of thought. It's
Mm-hmm.
very simple. I think it's the way our minds are supposed to be working, but because of, how we're raised and what customs we have and what prejudices we, incur, we start to clog up that mechanism, and it's not working the way it should. So
Mm-hmm.
usually we're thinking very dogmatically, and thinking dogmatically is actually really complicated, and I think it's really hard on the mind. So it's, and by thinking dogmatically, I mean you're clinging to a certain belief system or structure, which
Mm-hmm.
you're not willing to divorce yourself from, because you're very personally invested in it and it might shape your life.
Mm-hmm.
This is really stressful for us, I think, because first of all, the first thing you do when you're being dogmatic is you have to block out the other person's voice. There is no way that dogmatism can work otherwise. And I think this
Mm-hmm.
is stressful for the mind, because we have evolved to be very social animals, and I think that we are, when we're functioning correctly, we're receptive to information that we're getting from other people. So the first thing when you're being
Mm-hmm.
dogmatic, you're blocking off this very natural conduit of thought. And then, second of all, I think that it takes a lot of work to do the mental gymnastics required to rationalize and reinforce a belief system. And so you're spending more time trying to stay consistent to a belief system than actually having a dialogue or engaging with another person
Mm-hmm.
perspective. So I think actually this is doing a lot of damage and is creating a lot of stress. And in critical thinking, you learn to remove yourself from this way of thinking. So instead of like starting a conversation here where it's like, I'm here and I'm waiting for you to
Yeah.
stop talking so I can tell you
Yeah.
why I disagree. Instead,
Right.
critical thinking is all about, performing an analysis so that you can form a judgment, which means you
Mm-hmm.
can't start with a judgment. You have to withhold judgment. You have to suspend
Yeah.
affirming or assenting to anything, which means you give yourself space to let your mind do what it's supposed to do, which is you
Yeah.
hear the person talking. You don't try to trouble them. Instead,
Yeah.
you want to figure out, why do they think this way? What are the inferences that they're using to get somewhere? You
Yeah.
remain very open-minded, right? Because you're like, oh, so in order to understand why they're thinking the way they're thinking, I have to be willing to entertain the premises in the way that they're entertaining. So I
Yeah.
always tell people, if here's the most practical benefit of critical thinking. If you are a person who stresses out all the time, if you have anxiety, if
Yeah.
you have a lot of problems talking to people, you find it not enjoyable, not because you hate people, but because you find that it's really, kind of futile, and leads to disagreement and antagonisms and all this kind of stuff, I tell you, start critical thinking. You will literally start to de-stress. You will start
Mm-hmm.
to be thinking in the way that we think when we're children, which is very open-minded, absorbing
Mm-hmm.
information, willing to entertain lots of different things, having real
Mm-hmm.
dialogues with people. It's a really, instead of like, I think our first thing is always like start stuffing medications down people's throats when they're anxious. When I think really people are anxious for a rational reason, which is we are not engaging in any real thought. And I think that this
Yeah.
can have a lot of bad effects on us in terms of our health and in terms of our psyche.
Yeah.
Another obvious benefit of critical thinking.
I can interrupt. I'm just thinking of like a good analogy, because it's like not thinking critically is like, or just not, yeah, not having that skill set is like having a door, versus like thinking critically is like having a screen door. Like we've got a filter, like we still can like let the stuff in, but at least we have this filter for that stuff coming in, instead of the stuff like waiting outside the door, like banging on the door, and then we open it and we're just like completely overwhelmed, like the snow that's falling in on you, like in a very cartoonish way. And it's like, yeah, that is really stressful. Like I don't know what the fuck is on the outside, on the other side of my door, instead of like, oh, I see that stuff, and like, oh, I don't have to let it in, or this is like stopping at least some of it, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's nothing to fear. All that's there is
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
From perspective, you can even tell from the body language how stressful it is when people start
Yeah.
dialoguing, especially with someone who thinks differently from them. They
Uh-huh.
even have this kind of stance
Very
and
guarded, crossing
yeah,
arms, like not averting eyes or getting the furrowed
yeah.
brow,
If
or
you
just
think about what's going on, it's like,
yeah.
so this is a pretense, really. It's not a conversation. This is a pretense. And if you
Mm-hmm.
know what's going on, it's just an exchange of information is supposed to be happening. That's it.
Yeah.
You can choose to, allow this to enter into how you form a judgment or not. But this should not be a scary or negative process. This is supposed to be
Mm-hmm.
fun. That's the thing. That's like thinking about things is supposed to be fun. Like dialoguing is supposed to be fun precisely because of it gets you back into that mode where like, oh, I don't have to stress about stuff just because I don't agree with it. Or maybe you
Yeah.
would agree with it if you listened, you know, like, or
Yeah.
maybe if you don't agree with it, you can see the virtue of why someone thinks that way. So, you know, we call this
Mhm.
pluralism, accepting that there are different pictures of life that one could lead. And it's really
Yeah.
cool to understand why someone would go that direction, even if you don't. That's okay. We don't have to be
Mhm.
stabbing each other in the street because, you know, of someone who this person voted for. Like, this is not a way,
Right.
this is not a way that people should be engaging. The second practical benefit, I'm really trying to just do a sell here of critical thinking. Number one, you might lower your anxiety. Okay.
Yeah.
Number two, well, very obviously, you make better decisions. And that's, you know, and sometimes, you know, so that's a good thing, right? You don't want to make bad decisions. You want your life to be better, not worse. And so
Yeah.
sometimes you actually might make a decision and it wasn't the best, but even then, you can tell yourself, given the information I had and the amount of time
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
deliberated as best as I could, and anybody
Mhm.
would have probably come up with that. And so this helps alleviate this burden of beating yourself up over things that you've decided in the past. There's a
Mhm.
whole movement called Stoicism, which is dedicated to minimizing suffering because of regrets. This is because they understood many people create so much suffering for themselves because they cannot get over a decision they made in the past
Mm.
that they wish they could have done something otherwise. And so when you slow down and think critically, even if you didn't make the best decision that could have been made, you don't beat yourself up because you're like, I only had so much time, I only had so much information, and there's no reason to beat myself up because if I had the same amount of time, the same information, I would have made the same decision anyway. So it was the best decision
Mhm.
at the time.
Mhm.
Third of
There
all,
it is.
benefit is that you can actually make and have friends. You know, like you don't only have to be friends with people who think exactly like you about
A
everything.
snap. You're talking foolishness, so.
You think critically again, you know, because you know exchanging information becomes fun, and you know, are willing to entertain different options. You can then kind of talk to a lot more people, and you have a lot more fun doing so. And like I said, I'm a paralegal. We have had people getting divorces because they don't agree on stuff that actually has no relevance to their day-to-day lives, you know, just because they can't agree on these abstract kind of things. And
Mm.
people talk about it as an issue with politics, and I don't think that's true. I think political discussions just make salient how big the problem is with critical thinking. That if people were able to
Mhm.
say that, we would be okay thinking, you know, very differently, and we'd probably be able to talk to each other, and it wouldn't
Yeah.
be such a big deal. And then there's of
Yeah.
course the I think the personal benefits, which is I think the subjective character of thinking well. There's a subjective value. It's almost like when you go to the gym or you go running or you do some calisthenics or you eat really well for a long time. And even though it was kind of hard to get there, you feel so good. It's almost like it's
Mhm.
a kind of high. It's a thrill of your
Mhm.
body working well. There's
Mhm.
something similar that happens to your mind when you use your mind well. In contemporary society, we don't talk about this, but in the ancient world and early modern world, they did, and they actually had a name for it. They called it intellectual passion, and this was
Mm.
this kind of pleasure response that comes from logical expansion. That there's something genuinely, intrinsically enjoyable about pressing your mind, and I don't mean fantasizing or imagining things. I mean literally working your mind logically. There's something that
Mhm.
actually feel good. And some philosophers even argue, and I agree, that this pleasure can completely transcend any pleasure you feel physically. And when
Mm.
I was a young child, that was when I knew I was never going to have a normal life because
Mhm.
I enjoyed so much this activity of thinking and forcing myself try to think well, that I
Mhm.
can't imagine anything surpassing the amount of pleasure I get from this. And in fact, of all the drugs and sex and weird things I've done, nothing has that pleasure. So there's definitely this personal advantage, you know. And
Mhm.
I used to tell my students is a kind of mental adventurousness, like this ability to have a mental adventure. And in the same way that we sometimes look down on people or kind of judge people when they're scared of leaving their house and trying something new, I think
Mhm.
we should do that. I think with people who are not mentally adventurous, that we should, you know, like, come on.
Yeah.
It's cool to kind of jump from the plane of your own mind and try to land somewhere else where you don't have a map, you don't
Yeah.
know where to land, and just see what happens. It's really fun.
Yeah. On that, I two kind of sides to it. The way that I see it is like one, this is very similar to how we speak of meditation, and whether it's like, physical yoga, or, these traditions, where you attain these mental states that are, you're working your mind. I mean, meditation is not easy. It's like you're not doing anything, and that's sometimes the hardest thing to do. So it's like, yes, we are trying to focus. We're just trying to think about, focus on our breathing, or focus on one spot, like visually, or whether it's a mantra, like some sensory thing, is that's where our focus is. But that ends up allowing us to attain this different mental state, a higher mental state. And so there's that is, saying the exact same thing. It's like, once you get in touch with that, like, mental feeling of peace and like quiet and calm, it's just like, nothing else is really going to touch that. But then, and so I'm really comfortable with that. Like, that's the direction that I want to go. I as smart as I'm, you folks that I'm surrounded with, it's like, I want to get out of the books and do more of like that kind of stuff. But on another hand, how did you just say it? Like, doing, these mental acrobats and jumping out of the, the plane of your own mind. For me, it's like when I hang out with my friends, especially my best friend who has a bunch of kids, like, it is outside of my comfort zone to be in this other kind of happy mental state where we're making up things, we're playing. And, there's a lot to be said with like psychology and child psychology, as far as like the benefits of play, like as children and then as adults. And that's something that we lose touch with, and all of those good things. But I definitely noticed that it's like, it's still kind of a harmless state of mind. And it's really healthy for us to go into these, like, to do these mental acrobats. Like, okay, I'm going to start calling these children by names that aren't theirs, or things they made up. And we're going to like see things that aren't there. Like, that's just, it's a similar kind of thing. And it's really like still strange to like like be in this moment with myself, and just like, what is wrong with you? Like, why don't you want to do this? Like, what, just play the damn game, but it's that same feeling that other people have, where it's like they don't want to think critically, or they don't want to meditate, like
Yeah, it's
similar
like,
stuff.
who wants to go jogging? I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
on the couch, and the thing is, everyone knows the effects. They do feel, a
Yeah.
lot of people feel good when they do. And if jogging is not your thing, then whatever, some other kind of exercise. I mean, it's just because that's our bodies, are supposed to be doing those things. You're supposed to be
Right.
moving your body, and so your body is going to feel best when it's doing what it's supposed to do. Now, because of custom and because of like lifestyle, again, these things kind of hunker you down, and so now we're living in ways that are just not the way that our bodies are supposed to be working. Like, we're not supposed to be sitting for 12 hours a day in front of a
Right.
screen with blue light staring at us or whatever. That's not like,
Right.
there's not a coincidence that it affects your mood, and you're just like, ugh, and blah blah blah, and then it starts this
Right.
vicious cycle where you have no motivation, blah, blah, blah. And so getting out of that custom is really where the hard work is. It's not the actual,
Hmm.
once you get into the habit of exercising, it's almost like you can't stop. Like,
Right.
it's, you do it easily, and the joy and the good feeling of your body afterwards, kind of
Hmm.
keeps you going. It's just kind of getting into the habit. And I
Right.
think that there's a mental equivalent. So when I think of critical thinking, which is, again, like, you're doing these logical exercises to just push, logically expand your mind. It's the same thing. Because of custom, we don't encourage critical thinking. We don't, most of our lives we're not thinking deeply about anything, and sometimes we even discourage it. Nowadays,
Right.
you'll get everybody snapping when somebody's like, oh, I'm going to tell you off, and it feels good. We have this, like, you're telling someone off, and this group, you're using these insults, blah blah blah. No one's doing like this because someone's logical, though.
Right.
Like, there's no reward for it. So we have all of this, these these ways of living that don't encourage critical thinking. So it's no surprise then, now, when you say, okay, let's do some logic, that people aren't going to be like, oh, that's fun. It's hard. It's like getting up off the couch and saying, okay, now you got to run 6 miles. But again, there's that benefit of, it's just like when your body's doing what it's supposed to do, you feel better, you're healthier, your mood is great. There's that
Yeah.
mental, equivalent, where when you're using your mind the way it's supposed to be used, which is
Hmm.
logically, your mind is working well when it's working logically, not
Hmm.
exhaustively logically. That's not everything.
Right. We don't have to do truth tables, folks. Like, this
Yeah,
is just
exactly.
being rational.
You're doing an analysis, you're thinking slowly, you're paying attention, you're focusing, you're looking at different options, you're staying open-minded, you're doing a self-evaluation, you're considering another side. When you're doing stuff like that and you're using your mind the way that it's supposed to be used, it feels good. And I definitely don't see it as anything but your mind returning back to this very simple, basic state where just your mind, you're letting your mind do what it's supposed to do, and you got to just get all that junk off of the it's almost like, I think it was Descartes who talks about like your mind automatically wants to point at whatever is true when it comes to logical matters, or good when it comes to practical matters, but because of custom and prejudice, it hunkers down on your meter, and so you can't tell which one is and so the work of education, so this is a Socratic definition of education is not adding facts to your mind, it's getting this junk off of your truth meter, so to speak.
It's
So
the WD-40 of life.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that's why, and they have a different conception from the empiricists, but that's what they were arguing. They said our mind works well. We just have a bunch of junk in it that's not allowing it to work well. We just got to remove it somehow. And so that's why I don't see it as like it's this thing it's this hard thing in that sense. It's hard in the sense that you have to do the work of how do I get my mind to be simple again, simple again.
Yeah. There was something you were saying earlier, I think it was like bullet point number 3 about, doing the best. And you definitely qualified it. It's something that people, I assume, have a hard time hearing or understanding, is that like there's the best that could be done in a situation. And that's just kind of like in a perfect world. And then there's the best that we could do in a situation. And that's really important to keep in mind, even if we, who is it? Miguel Ruiz. He says it in the 4 agreements. It's like that. I think that's the last one, like always do your best. And it's just, I like how you broke it down. It's like, given the time, the amount of preparation I was able to do, given the circumstances, like what the information that I knew in the situation, this was the best that I could do. And if we just kind of hold that in mind, then we're not holding ourselves back as much, or hopefully, we can still feel some guilt or whatever that human stuff is about, well, I wish I would have done something else, but we are closer to accepting this is what I did and this is why I did it. And there weren't really other options at the time. So
the Stoics, so Descartes, his ethics, he draws from the Stoics, and he actually says the number one virtue you could have is the resolution to use your mind well. And so he was kind of making the same point, of course, because he was influenced by this kind of Platonic Socratic tradition of, if you make this resolution, it makes no sense to feel bad about any decision you've ever made. It just makes no sense, right? I mean, you know that you did whatever you could to come up with something, to decide, because when it comes to logical matters, you can spend all day, trying to find what the best is. When it comes to practical matters, life doesn't work that way. You have a finite amount of time. You have to make a decision, right? People who are constantly stuck in this, contemplation mode, you're crippled into inaction. You got to make a decision at some point. And so if you actually every single time make the effort to do as fair deliberation as possible, it really makes no sense to feel bad about anything that you've ever decided. And that was why he was arguing. He was actually made a whole entire ethical account out of this, and this is a virtue that you just resolve to use your mind as well as you can. That's it.
It makes me think of, what is that phrase? How parents will tell kids, like, if you don't lie, then you don't have to, no, if you tell the truth, then you don't have to remember a lie, kind of thing. It's like, if we just set ourselves up to just kind of do these things, and we don't have the stress of doing the other stuff. Sorry, I got dog hair stuck to my lips suddenly. They both came back inside. Okay, so before we talk about, what I wrote down was adult EDs, because I'm tired of writing out existential dilemmas. But before that, I haven't spoken to any of my female friends, particularly female academic friends, about the Dr. Biden bullshittery. One of my friends, she did post on Facebook, because she's Dr. Hill now. She did post kind of repost this article where somebody pretty much like they said all the things very succinctly, but I just wanted to bring this up with you because we hadn't talked about it, and it just is blowing my fucking mind. Like, do you know? Did
So
you see that this editorial?
someone said she shouldn't be referred to as doctor.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean, well, that's not the first time I've heard of that. So a lot of people,
Oh yeah, no.
a lot of people outside of academia don't realize that when someone gets their PhD, a doctorate, their formal title is doctor. And so one easy way that people try to undermine someone who's not a medical doctor is to say it's misleading to refer to yourself as doctor, whatever.
Yeah,
And, you know,
but
for
I think
yeah,
the
and so,
worst part of like what the guy said was something to the effect of like, well, somebody told me that you can only be called doctor unless if you deliver a child. And like in this moment, I about dropped my phone. I'm just like, but she's a mother. Like, so now we have to deal with the feminism of this, and like just there's just so many things going on at this point that are
I
just
mean, the
so
one
fucked
good thing
up.
that came out of that is that now people understand that the title doctor actually has a pretty wide application. I mean, it is,
Oh my gosh.
for instance, when I was in school, we didn't call our professor doctor something. We called them professor and then their name. Like, you
Yeah.
know, I did hear some people say doctor this or that, but it was usually
Right.
some professor. Um, and so I think just regular people might not know that
I
because
guess, which
that's
is like point three is that the person writing is like, he has a bachelor's. And it's just like, didn't you learn this somewhere along the lines of this is just a
make people learn it. That's the
stupid.
one, you know. So that was like I have a friend. Well, all my friends have doctorates, but I mean, like we were at the airport, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so they were on the phone, and I don't know, like there's someone said doctor this, and it's like, yeah, I'm doctor that or whatever, and the person's like, oh, are you a doctor? And they're like, well, I have a doctorate, and they're like, why would you call yourself a doctor then? And, and that's like I think a typical confusion that doctor means
Oh, oh
MD
goodness. Uh-huh.
instead of PhD. I don't think most people know that. Now, of course, when you do find out about that, and then if you were trying to undermine the person, then you pretend you don't know or something, which I think is very,
Yeah.
you know, that. Also, I think, you know,
Okay.
like I said, I don't think people are thinking that deeply when they're attacking each other. They're so clouded by a certain judgment or ideology that they can't even like this is a perfect example of how your research can be stunted by prejudice. So for instance, if you're going, let's say you're writing this article, you're like, I'm going to take down Dr. Biden, or, you know, let's say that's your agenda for whatever reason, like you're getting paid because, you know, you're a blogger for the other side or something. And so because you're so wrapped up in this drama about the political differences, you don't
Mm-hmm.
even think to research what a
Mm-hmm.
why is or under what circumstances someone can refer to themselves as a doctor, for instance. That would be like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that would probably be a good place to start, at least, you know.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of doctor is she? And then look up and then realize, oh, doctorate, oh, doctorate, people call themselves doctor. Okay, got it. That whole thing
Mm-hmm.
has been, you know, the
Mm-hmm.
person would have been dead basically. But it's like that's a good example of how even just the paths of research you take are going to be dictated by whatever prejudices you have. Like it's like if you didn't have
Mm-hmm.
that prejudice, if you had just thought to look up what did she get her degree in, what is that degree, how do people refer to people who have that degree, in 3 steps on Google, you would have been done. That article, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, in that person's defense, and given
Yeah.
the defense that nobody does good research, especially for news outlets,
Yeah.
yeah, I've heard that mistake many, many times.
I guess I you have given them much more credit than I have, and that is good. I'm fine with accepting that. There was still some other bullshittery that fell out of his mind and onto the virtual page. That was
Yeah, I
just
mean, I don't think anybody should be
ridiculousness.
holding. I mean, I don't think anybody should
But
be holding any news agency as a paragon of, you know, great thinking, good article writing, good journalism. Everybody knows this is all
yeah,
sensational on
yeah,
all sides. This is all sensational stuff because that's the stuff
yeah,
everybody is all ramped up. Everybody's all tense and ready to attack each other. So they have to.
yeah.
And I think even if they knew that, so here's my other theory. My other theory is that maybe they knew that
Mm-hmm.
they don't care because people just want to read dirt about the other side. I think 50%
Mm.
of news is just made up stuff nowadays. Like, I mean, genuinely, anybody is swilling whatever crap they can to get those clicks. I know
Oh
people
my
who write for
gosh.
blogs and that pressure of you want to villainize X person, this person X, and whatever slop you can throw into the article, you do it, because people are not doing research either. They'll read an article,
Mm,
they'll be like, ha, ha,
mm,
ha, ha, and then, then they'll repost it. So nobody's doing research. There's all this pressure to get clicks and to be, have more clicks than the next one. And there's even, they have these competitions where the boss will see how many seconds another news agency posted the story before you did, and hold you to task at a meeting about this. There is
oh
extreme pressure
gosh.
to push out stuff, and there's not that much exciting stuff going on if you really think about
Mm,
it. So it's like you have all like the biggest crap thinking possible in a crap arena, and
mm,
crap people waiting to read it and judge each other. I mean, so I don't think anybody should be reading news articles and surprised that, these kinds of things, whether it was a mistake or geniusly done on purpose, because on the other side, they don't care about her credentials, right? They just know she's the wife of the guy we didn't want, and we will believe anything you tell us, and we will find
mm,
any way to rationalize and make loopholes around anything. Because for instance, you can see on the other side, for instance, let's say someone who read this article and they don't like Biden, because that's not who they voted for. You can see them actually beginning to do the rationalization work that a dogmatic person would do, which is, yeah, maybe it's not custom, or maybe it is customary for anyone with a doctor to be called doctor, but maybe we should change that because it's confusing. Like, they'll rationalize it for themselves. They'll be like, yeah, that is confusing. Why would you refer yourself to a doctor if you're not, like, or you don't have an
mm,
MD? How am I supposed to know? Blah blah blah. They'll
mm,
rationalize it for themselves. And just like on the other side, you can bring up some crap about, um, Trump that's not exactly true, and the other side, they'll find some way to be like, yeah, but he is crap. That could, this
mm,
guy, whatever. It's so
mm,
every side is doing the same thing. So I think,
mm,
I don't think anybody should be surprised by the low quality of writing and thinking going on in
mm.
pretty much. I mean, it's been a long time since I read a news article, and I was like, oh, that was informative, and that was good. I mean, I keep up with the news so I can see what, sort of
Right. See if the world is falling apart out there,
alternate
kind of
reality is
thing.
being pushed this day. But I mean, other than
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
I'm not going to be expecting.
yeah. I think what like weirds me out so much, one is that like it's something that I certainly thought was common knowledge, and again, fine, I'll give that it's not fine. But then also, like, any time that I'm trying to think of kind of the rational framework, the logical framework, the mental framework of folks who are trying to, attack somebody who isn't provoking an attack. It's like, oh, I'm gonna write this opinion piece because I think this highly educated woman doesn't deserve respect based on her education that I'm going to tell you about.
Yeah, but
And there
people
wasn't
love that slop though. They love
like,
it.
it's a kind of like rational world, or just this mental world that it's just like, I like does not compute. Like, I just have such a hard time wrapping my brain around just like, wait, but why and how did we get to these conclusions? But not in the sense of like, I need to know how you got to these conclusions. Just like, what were you smoking this morning that made you believe that this was gonna, I don't know, like get you a cookie, or I just
But
don't know.
but they
So
probably do get cookies from their side.
probably.
Again, nobody is doing this because it's like a true, fidelity to facts or fidelity to good.
Yeah.
It's there. I mean,
Yeah.
like I said, when I see my friends who do blog writing, I don't know why they do it, except for
Mm,
the ones who are doing it just for fun. I don't know why they do
mhm,
it. There is this pressure to cook out stuff that's going to stay within the line of your target audience. Whereas I think good writing and good thinking and good journalism, you don't worry about a target audience. You want to make a new audience. But I
mhm.
think that what's going on now is you're just peddling crap to your people, and nobody cares if it's right or wrong or if it makes sense. The same thing was, so for instance, I think that spouses should just be off limits when it comes to these things. Like, I don't, the
Mm,
same thing was happening on the left side when, how many thought pieces have now been written about Melania Trump and how
mm.
she must either be a abused person who can't get out of Trump's shadow, or how she's terrible because she's not speaking up. And it's like, she is not the fucking president. Why are we writing
Right.
this about this woman who we did not vote into office? This is his wife.
Mhm.
Why are we writing pieces about this woman? And that's again, if you ask, why are we right? What does this have to do with anything? What does this have to do
Mm,
with anything economically, or what's going on with coronavirus? What his wife is doing or not doing? She's playing a symbolic role that every first lady has to play, and what she
right,
really thinks we don't really know, and her relationship with her husband we don't really know, and
right.
whatever. But the left was slopping their own crap when it came to Trump's wife. Both sides are doing the same thing, and it's not because of any integrity or because we're really trying to come hunker down and discover some facts and think about things. It's like because they're just
Hmm.
trying to get the clicks, and they're just pushing whatever crap they can get so that everybody can stay in that dogmatic frame of mind. Like, look what
Mm,
this person is doing, look what this person is saying, look, blah blah blah. And in reality, it's like none of this is actually important. Like, there are people
hmm.
who are unemployed and they don't have houses. Like, that's what's important. Like, who cares?
Hmm. Very briefly, I wanted to just say it explicitly that another reason that I wanted to bring that up is because you're one of the smartest women I know, and even though I don't nearly have like the experience under my belt as you do in academia, like I still have. I imagine that your experiences you have, and we've talked about. Okay, we've talked about a lot of like casual bullshit, but in formal settings, in formal settings, I've definitely encountered people who frankly just didn't think that we were smart. And it's like, oh, well, there's, just very dismissive. And it seems, and I have other friends who experience kind of similar things. And so it's just like, just bring it up to say that like, I guess it's kind of a shame that these things are still things to be dealt with, that there's, God, people are so afraid of like the word feminist. So it's like, I don't like to use that because it's just like, I'm going to shut off my hearing as soon as I hear that F word. But it's the not seeing kind of personhood, not seeing background, not seeing, and background as far as like experiences and, content of people. Because I don't know, because we're stuck in these dogmatic ways that are just stupid.
Yeah.
But
I think a lot of women, unfortunately, I mean, so I remember there was a woman in my PhD program. This woman was brilliant. The only person I thought who was more brilliant was, well, who my very the person I'm obsessed with. But there was this other woman. This woman, she was extremely amazing at logic and philosophy of science, and that was the stuff that she was researching and she was teaching. She looked beautiful too. She looked exactly like a Barbie doll, and she liked Disney and Beyonce. Very very girly girl kind of person. And I remember just like the first class or the second class, there was this certain kind of behavior towards her, like that, not
mm,
taking her seriously. I remember the first two classes. This didn't happen very often, but there was the first two classes that I had of two separate kinds of classes, that there were like there was this like libertarian bro, self-described, who literally came up to me after the class and he's like, who made this syllabus? This doesn't even make sense or whatever. Like, I made this syllabus. Like really? Or he would come to my office. He came to my office hours the first week, and he gave his own lecture of his interpretation of what was talked about in class. And I'm just like, well, you should try to get a PhD then. I don't care if you have to do this, whatever. One of the nice things about philosophy, and this is something that I felt in the master's program, especially, or the first time I really felt it, was that with philosophy, I felt like even though those kinds of things would happen when we were first interacting with people, that they would eventually subside. That's something I love
mhm,
about philosophy, and that's why I felt
mhm,
very much at home. Because anywhere else, it seemed like once someone made a certain impression of you, it just pretty much stuck. And of course,
mm,
a lot of people think that if you see a woman, and they're not even, it's not even on a conscious level. That's why we call it implicit bias, right? I mean, like, it's not even on a conscious level, but it's like like, oh, she's hot, or like, she's probably not as smart as that guy, or or even
mhm,
though she said the same thing as the guy, listen to the guy, whatever. Those things happen. And
mhm,
philosophy, I really like how, or at least my experience, and this was my experience in the master's program and the PhD program, it seemed like in the beginning there would be those kinds of, those sort of cultural stigmas. I guess you can't help it. People are raised to think a stupid way, and they think that way. But then as we were doing philosophy and really getting into it, that these things started to kind of dissolve, and then where if
mm.
we had any antagonisms, it became a different interpretation of the or something. Like, I remember that like, at one time in San Francisco, where like the police would be called because people were arguing about which interpretation of I was just like, oh, that's beautiful. It's not because and, there was like all different different races and ethnicities involved or whatever.
Yeah.
But that was really where the real issue, happened. So I think like one reason I like being in philosophy was because it was more about being doing the philosophy, and it's like you have to go into such deep recesses of your mind that it's almost like you have to kind of push aside all the other stuff, and like only you have to focus so hard on the argument and what inferences are being laid out that it's just like after a while you just stop even paying attention to, or it's almost like your brain can't even work in implicit bias mode anymore because you're not even doing anything remotely in the world anymore. You're just at this abstract level. So yeah, so I had those experiences, but I had more experiences where I felt really validated. Like like it seemed like if you were doing your shit and you were doing it well, that people responded to it. So I mean, I didn't have many people think that I was incompetent. I think people could tell, like when it comes to stuff I don't know about, I'm honest. I don't have a wide range of expertise. And I would always say if I don't know something, but if I know something, and if we're talking about my specialty, then I will talk over you more than any guy will talk over you. I mean, that's how I am. No one ever questioned whether I knew something or not. And that was the same thing with the other woman talking about. And this is the woman who was the greatest person probably ever in contemporary philosophy is a woman, and nobody cares that she's a woman. They know when she walks into the room and you're giving a talk, you're fucked because she's gonna the loophole. And so that can happen in philosophy, which is a very traditionally, male, white, but like the upper class white kind of discipline. If those changes are possible in philosophy, I think it's possible anywhere. But I do think again that the kind of thinking involved in philosophy kind of helped move that along a lot faster than other areas. So yeah.
Final question. Say it again.
Yeah, so I experienced both, like a few of those times where it was like, oh, what do you know, and then just kind of a few weeks later where they're just like, okay, I know nothing. Like, yeah,
so the final official question is about back to these adult EDs. So existential dilemmas as an adult. Kind of like, what is your experience with them? What do you have to say about that?
Well, which existential dilemma?
That always ends up being the answer. Like, there's just existential dilemmas all the time, every day, every year, something new, every month is one new. Like, however, so obviously you experience them. Obviously, you have a relationship with dilemmas of the existential variety.
Right. I mean, what you're talking about, like, oh, should I kill myself or should I live? Existential
dilemma? Well, I don't know. I mean, whatever is most important for you. I mean, it's funny how this has kind of been addressed. Like, with Ken, I really wanted to speak with him about being a parent, or, even with my friend Lisa, because, I made it very, very clear. It's like, I don't have children. And so my existence hasn't been challenged by the created existence of another human that now relies on me. Like that, that is a mind fuck for me. It's a very enticing mind fuck, but it's still very like, why? I don't know that I could do that. I'm very happy that I'm not a mother. For philosophical purposes, like for the sanity of my mind. So, but
there's a whole book about that topic. Actually, I started the paper about how can you, using decision theory, so the best mode of model thinking, how is one supposed to rationally assess whether being a parent is a good decision? And she makes the argument that when it comes to transformative experiences where you have no clue what your life is going to be like once it happens because it's so different, it seems like you can't use decision theory. And her whole book is a sense of how you can use decision theory, but you would have to change what it is to assess the values of life before a child versus life after a child, which you don't know about. So, I mean, I recommend, it's called Transformative Experience by L.A. Paul. Basically thinking about this issue, like, what do you do? Like, I have no clue what my life is going to really be like. I only have, second person testimony, and I don't know what I'm going to, because everyone talks about I become a mother or a father and I'm a completely different person. And so how are you supposed to decide before you have the experience whether it's an experience worth going through? It's a great
like, I mean, so you haven't always been vegan. I mean, you have been for a very long time, but so that is, for many people, that decision, that transition, I don't even know what the right word is for it, but that difference, that lifestyle is Scary. It promotes, creates a dilemma within them, because then they're not sure what their choices are going to be, how they're going to like move about in the world, how they're going to interact with their family members or friends or loved ones who like hold true to, eating meat or like barbecuing, whatever. Entire like social situations are built around, emotional situations are built around like these meat and animals as food experiences. And so if they're going to make this decision and transition for themselves, then that can mean losing like support, losing like, kind of purposes and stuff. So like that is a whole thing that I don't know that we've ever really talked about. I don't know that it's been a thing for you.
For me, it
Yeah.
was I had
Right.
no angst in becoming, I was vegetarian for a long time. Well, actually, when I was a
Yeah.
young child, I wanted to stop eating meat, and then I had this conversation with my dad. He was, we're just too poor to be throwing meat out, like, because I was putting meat in my shoe and putting it in the toilet whenever I went to the bathroom, and my parents found out, and it was hell because we were ridiculously poor. And so I made a deal with my sister after I had the conversation with my dad, and he did sort of suggest he understands why I was doing it. He actually gave me a book of Plutarch and Porphyry, and he left a bookmark in the chapter about why you shouldn't eat animals. So even though he didn't understand it, he wanted to say, "Listen, I don't get it, but there are some people who think like this, and just letting you know, I get it, but you have to move out of the house before you make these decisions." And so I made a deal with my sister that I would give her my meat, and she gives me her potatoes, and so that was the way kind of circumventing the meat eating thing. If I had to eat it, I had to eat it, but I knew when I went to college, then that's when I could be vegetarian. And then I just didn't know what veganism was. Once I heard what veganism was, then I became vegan. There was no angst, there was no choice in the matter. I was just like, I don't want to be the kind of person who's not bothered by this, and that was it. I don't even have, when people ask me why are you vegan, I have no clue. I have no answer for you. It's a character thing. That's it. It's obviously the right decision. I'm trying to think of a decision in which there was angst such that I would describe it as an existential dilemma in the last few years.
I don't know that you had much angst with like not going on to PhD, not finishing your PhD. That seemed kind of obvious at the time.
Yeah, I have pressure. I have a lot of pressure. For some reason, people think like, if you had a PhD after your name, then, and I'm just like, I don't care. Like, I just don't care. Like, there are lots of things where people have a PhD after their name and it's the worst thing I've ever read. So, I mean, I don't care. And so if people won't take me seriously, I don't like, fine. I don't want anyone to take my work seriously because I have a PhD. I'm doing this. I mean, like, I do talk to scholars. I definitely believe that you have to peer review your work and you can't be writing out of your ass. You should be talking to people who are scholars in the discipline so that you can get feedback and get pushback. And that's what I do. I'm doing that kind of work. And the thing, if I couldn't do that, maybe I'd go back to school because that's the only environment in which I would find that kind of feedback. But I don't have to. Nowadays, you have the internet. You can just write to a professor. You can Zoom with a professor. I talk to whoever. I talk to more people now in different universities than I did when I was in the PhD program, actually. So that's why it's taking me so long to do this work, because every time I write anything, I send it to someone who knows a lot about it, or 2 or 3 people, and they say, nope, there's a whole book that's going against this, and I agree with you, but maybe this, and there's a loophole here, or whatever. So yeah, I don't feel angst, though I feel there's people trying to put pressure on me, and I just say, oh yeah, I'll think about it, and then I just don't think about it, because I've created exactly the life that I want.
Yeah. So maybe answer it in a bit of a different way, or address it in a different way. What thoughts do you have on existential dilemmas in general? Because this is something that I forget who I was talking with. I'm under the assumption that a lot of people are in the middle of dilemmas right now, and they don't either they don't realize it, or they don't know what the fuck to do. Their lives need to change. Their lives are changing. I mean, especially here in 2020, like, not having a job that you kept for however many years. Like my next conversation, like he had his job. He worked in the same place since the last time we saw each other 14 years ago. And then, their place closed. And so now he's got to do something else. And, that wasn't something that he was consciously preparing for. Of course, he's in a better position than most. He's a yogi, so these are kind of being contemplative is just what he does. But there's other people who they don't fucking know how they're moving forward, and don't know how to address not knowing how to move forward. So like what words of wisdom or what words do you have?
No, I'm the worst person to ask for advice about that. I've been I've been in those situations where it's like, well, I don't have, I just moved. I have got no place to live. I have no job. I have no money. And, I don't think I'm a good person to ask because I live in a way where I live on very little. Like, from like I'm obsessed with like this old ancient way of life where, people would be homeless and they were living their best lives, because they just wanted to be, they just wanted freedom. That's what they wanted. They would like, so everyone else would look at them and they're like, you're this peasant. How can you be happy? And they were just like, I get to have some more conversations with my friend tonight about the nature of the good, like, so I think one of my favorite quotes ever, it's from the historian Diogenes, not the philosopher, but he wrote this really famous history of philosophers, and he attributes this one quote to Socrates, and it's something like, "Oh, how I long for so little," something like that, like just this kind of attitude, which I really admire, like getting rid of this need that you need to have a lot of stuff or you have to have stuff going on or whatever. So I'm not a good person to ask because I have been in situations, as you know, before, when I first came to Maine, I was living in a cemetery because I didn't have a place to stay, and I just kind of saw it as like, well, let's see what's going to happen next. And then when it started getting colder, then it's like, well, then I went to the shelter, and then that wasn't a great place, And actually, there was this confusion, like, why are you here? You're this hyper educated person. Like, even just the way they were treating me, they're like, you don't have a place to stay, and I'm like, no, I just have this bag and my books. So like, you said it's a homeless shelter. I'm homeless,
Yeah.
And so I stayed for one night, and then I felt bad because there was this sense of just like, you're not impoverished enough to be here, even though I didn't have anything. And then I literally found a free place to stay by sitting at a bar, and I kind of was talking to some people, and they're just like, do you need a job? And I was like, yeah, I'll try being a waitress. I was terrible. And one of the guys, his wife had just left him, and he's like, I have an extra room. And so, I mean, this could have easily turned into a Forensic Files episode, but I don't know. I just thought I just got this sense that these people were very good, like there were some other people talking to me, and I got this sense that they weren't very good, but which that might be another benefit of critical thinking, that I think you do get to, you can suss out characters, on the spot. But yeah, so for me, I have always been an optimist about anything existential. So there's some people who have like a very negative take on existential stuff, and in fact, so much so that Sartre had to write that really terrible lecture, Existentialism to Humanism. I mean, he was embarrassed by it. Everybody into existentialism was embarrassed by it. But the whole point was because, when he first was presenting this view, and not to mention, I mean, so he's very influenced by Nietzsche, later Nietzsche, because early Nietzsche was sad and pessimistic, as he was really influenced by Schopenhauer. But then he found his voice, and he's like, wait a minute, optimism is the way to go. And so he's like, fuck you, Schopenhauer, and then started doing his own thing, which is where you get these magnificent later works. And so someone like Sartre was a smart guy, and he could tell the beauty and optimism of what Nietzsche was talking about. And everybody was like, oh man, we have no external structure telling us how to lead our lives. Oh, and they were scared, and Sartre was like, hold on, existential is not supposed to be this sad thing. I'm letting you know, man, you're free. You're free. Like, that's a good thing. There's like, you have radical freedom, and on one side of the coin, it's scary, but on the other side, it's like you can create whatever life you want to live. Now, I don't think he means like literally like you could be a millionaire. That's right. Superficially, but meaning, if you value a certain kind of life and it's a robust, substantial kind of evaluation, you can live that life. And who cares what job you have or where you are or where your friends are or where anybody is, that you can create the kind of life that you want for yourself. And so I agree with, I hate the essay as much as anyone else does, but I agree that there's this beauty to existentialism and thinking about things existentially, that I would prefer to have that than to have this sure answer or some objective reality that's going to give us a framework for how we're supposed to think about things. And how nice it would be if we did see it as like, okay, I've lost a certain way of life because of circumstances. What now is ahead of me? That you can, this can be a good thing, that maybe you would have never tried some new thing, or maybe you would have never met some new person, or maybe you would have never thought more deeply about life or about what you want if you hadn't been in this circumstance. So trying to look at it as like, you do not lose the ability to shape your life just because circumstances have changed drastically. You remain radically free, and it's up to you how you want to interpret the radical freedom. You can see it in this negative sense, like, oh, I've lost everything, things can't go back to the way they were. Or you can look at it as, I'm still free, whether or not I like it, I'm still free, and what can I do with this now? What's going to be my next what kind of adventure can I next have? Of course, I'm not pretending, for instance, people who are in really dire circumstances, nobody, not even Sartre, is talking about these people, because of course there are certain conditions in society. And actually, one of the motivations for him to work on an existential structure was to say, because we're radically free, we also have a radical responsibility to one another. We don't have a God out there or any sort of deity or some sort of structure out there that's going to help people falling through the cracks who don't deserve it. So, which means it's on us, human beings, to support each other and to support, of course, other kinds of beings on the planet. And so I think if people saw existentialism in this positive way, that we would also have a more positive interpretation of social
Yeah.
structure, getting social nets and stuff like that, that we would say, yeah, this is, people shouldn't be falling through the cracks because it's our responsibility, because there's no one else there for them. We don't think that there is an afterlife where these people are going to be salvaged or things like that. Like, it's like what Nietzsche said, this is all we've got. Existence is really heavy. This is it.
Yeah. This is
you
it.
know like, this is it. So whenever people are talking about, like, oh, I'm in this crossroads and I don't know what I'm going to do, it's just like, that can be a really good thing if you look at it. Like, if you're healthy and life is actually pretty long, and you can have a big career change, or you can have a relationship change, or you can move somewhere new, or a lot of people are doing that and living more simply, or having more time to really assess, like, what's important to me, like, how do I want to live? And maybe we would have never asked ourselves these questions if we didn't have this opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually something that we were talking about last night to a degree, because so my brother's birthday was yesterday, and he's going to be retiring in the next year and a half, after doing 20 years in the Navy. And so, he's saying that he doesn't know what he's going to do. He still hasn't decided. He doesn't know what he's going to do when he grows up, once he retires. And, I'm of the thinking that's like, this sounds very exciting, like, to have had, this steady work for all this time, and then now, like, he almost literally gets to do anything that he wants, and that can be nothing, and that can be a whole lot of really fabulous, fantastic things. It's like that's like, it seems really big and daunting, but also, like, incredibly exciting, just like, whoo, like, but the hubby was saying that, like, it's the military does things to the mind in order to maintain, keep up those positions, and not in this, like, evil kind of way, but that's really just condensing what he was saying into a nutshell. And that needs to be taken into account, that it takes a lot of kind of all the mental energy that we use for philosophizing can't happen. can't be there, like, if you're in a serious position, a serious career, like being in the military. And that completely makes sense. So it's like, if I have to shut off that, if he has to shut off that switch, and then suddenly, like, not only turn on another one, but find it in the dark, like, it might not be as exciting as I or you might find it. But I'll still be
there
there.
are people in the military who are philosophically inclined, and they're good
Yeah.
And
It's
also,
just,
your brother might want to get into critical thinking. I mean, there's another circle. This comes circle. Here's the thing. This comes full circle to what we were talking about, because
it's possible. It is
one of
totally
the things in
possible.
critical thinking that you have to foster is open-mindedness. And a lot of times people think about open-mindedness only with respect to how you're engaging with other material or someone else. But open-mindedness is also important for yourself, that you have to be open-minded about your own life and about the options you have in your own life. And so learning to be open-minded is going to be useful, and it's, interacting with other people and trying to be open-minded is good practice for what is the ultimate goal, which is learning how to be open to yourself, that you can come up with different avenues of thought. Nobody's minds are completely foreclosed such that they can't come up with new avenues of thought, and that open-mindedness is something that you can turn toward yourself, which is why I don't think it's ever too late for anybody to get into critical thinking, because you have immediate benefits, that you will now start to see your own life in different ways, in ways that you would not have seen before if you hadn't learned to train your mind to look for more conceptual space, to be more evaluative about what options exist, or different ways to look at a situation, whereas before you might have only seen, oh, it can either be this way or that way. And then when you train your mind to work differently, that now it's like, oh, now 7 different options open up, or 8 different options open up. And so in critical thinking, I mean, it gives you, again, it gives you this kind of personal benefit, because you can apply it to your own life.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that we saw with our dad, who, when he retired from the Navy, he was teaching. He's been teaching. Well, he retired for a second time this year, but he went in to teach, JROTC in high schools, and I couldn't tell if it was him getting out of the Navy officially or being around more young minds on a regular basis, like which thing kind of shifted his perceiving more. But he definitely became more open to other stuff, more receptive, and yeah, I mean, I think it really took being out of that day to day framework for that to even like be possible. So again, as my brother's sister, I'm very optimistic. I'm very excited for him, and I'll like save all of that excitement, put it in a jar, and like give it to him as a retirement present if he hasn't quite like tapped into it or mustered it himself.
Yeah. Yeah, I know some people like they
Yeah.
retire and then they feel like depressed. We have
Yeah.
one woman before COVID, she would come back just to do stuff around the office because she's like, I
Mm.
have nothing to do, and
Yeah.
oh my
Yeah.
God, like, I never thought of retirement that way. But I mean, that's an important
Yeah.
perspective because a lot of older people do feel not needed or, superfluous.
Yeah.
Or there's no work for them. There's genuine ageism that goes on and stuff like that. I mean, I
Right.
minimize the reality of like some of the hardships that come with being older. But again, I mean, there are ways to equip yourself. If society won't give it to you, there are ways to equip yourself to deal with those kinds of challenges, whether it's ageism or racism or just being an outcast for political reasons, or whatever. There are ways
Yeah.
to equip yourself to kind of manage life's ebbs and flows, such that you're always kind of, it's your happiness is always on you. It's about you. It's emanating from you, and it's not because of anything else, or because of how external circumstances are.
Yeah. Instead of that song "Respect Yourself." No, is that what the lyric even is? I'm thinking like equip yourself. Ah. Like put that on our album whenever we make a philosophical when we make our band. We're
Oh God!
recording.
Oh my God! I've committed to being in so many bands. Oh my God!
Yeah,
Add that to the
I'm
list.
sucking you in. Is there anything else that you would like the world to know? Anything else that you would like to say that we haven't covered?
I think people should read a book called The Shallows by Nicholas Carr. And I think
Okay.
it's like The Shallows, and it's like how the internet is affecting our mind or something. He has a kind of negative conclusion, but the argument that he gives and the studies that he provides are unbelievable. And he talks basically the whole book is about how different technologies um, affect how our brain actually is. So he talks about neuroplasticity and using actual studies. And so he talks about, for instance, how our brains were when we didn't have like a written tradition. It was more of an oral tradition. And he goes through the development of books and what books were like in the beginning, which is actually really hilarious. And then the kind of changes that this made in terms of how we lived our life. And then what happened when people started reading. And so this unbelievable thing happened where our brain started to shift its power, so to speak, on paying attention and being attentive and focusing and all the things that we value about critical thinking. So in a way, it sort of kind of made space for critical thinking to be accessible to the general population and not just to an elite. And then with the invention of the internet, then this different kind of thing happened where we went back to almost this more scatterbrained, multitasking sort of brain, but which compromises our ability to think in a way that would be useful for critical thinking. And again, he has kind of a really negative thesis, but I think
Mm,
the book is really good to read because then you get a glimpse of what is happening in neuro studies and how our brain works and how the information we feed it can actually change how we think.
mm,
So I don't. I think it's a good thing to read because when people are talking about critical thinking or philosophy or these existential things or whatever, I don't think they realize how much power they have over how your mind works, and that you can do
mm,
simple things. So he's trying to give this argument about reading is actually really important, and not just because of a way to absorb information, but because there's something about having a page. There's nothing else going on. There's nothing flashing. There's no hyperlinks. You're not going down a rabbit hole. You are just literally silently focusing on a page. And that if you do this a lot, you actually can reclaim the power of your mind to pay attention, which I think if
Mm.
without paying attention and without the ability to focus, there is no hope for critical thinking. That's it. If you, anybody has bought my story about why critical thinking is really important, especially in a day and age like today where bad thinking is going to maybe lead us to some sort of psychotic war or something, like if you really see the virtues of critical thinking, you have to first reclaim your ability to focus, and then second of all,
Mm.
reclaim this natural ability to be humble, that which I think is also part of kind of slowing down and saying, I don't know everything. What is there to
Mm.
know? And now I have the ability to even pay attention so that I can start taking the steps that's needed to learn how to make good judgments. And so I would
Mm.
recommend that book. Not because I agree with the conclusion. You can agree with it if you want. I mean, he wrote it because he found himself unable to pay attention to stuff anymore.
Mm.
Like, I'm not thinking as well as I could. And then he found all of these examples in history where someone would move from, for instance, Nietzsche, he used to write by hand. And then when the typewriter came along, his writing changed and his ideas started to change. And he even said, there's something about the technology that's affecting how I'm thinking. And so he does this really good job of just going through history and going through lots of scientific studies where it talks about neuroplasticity.
Mm.
I'm beginning to think, I was talking about this with someone, I'm beginning to think that it's very likely, and here's one of the disadvantage of critical thinking, is that, I think it's going to become obsolete soon. We're creating a world in which critical thinking is not going to be that important. There's a really good
Mm.
book by this philosopher of technology at Oxford. His name is Luciano Floridi, and he wrote a lot of stuff, but he has one book that's supposed to be more mainstream, and it's
Mm.
Fourth Revolution, and he's talking about like how in the same way there's all these other revolutions like Copernican revolution, Darwinian revolution, there's now this fourth revolution, which is the um, social landscape, epistemic landscape, all landscapes being catapulted now onto the scene of the internet, basically.
Mm.
He refers to this new phenomenon as on life, like this is our life now is online, and
Mm.
important or whatever. And when I was reading the book, and he's more of an optimist than that guy Nicholas Carr that I was talking about. But it occurred to me that the way that the world is going to be very soon, and even maybe sometimes now, we might not need critical thinking actually, like, and I was beginning to think more about this idea I was telling you about clinical philosophy, that
Mm.
maybe that won't be such a problem if we had specialists and that was their job, almost in the way that we have
Mm.
therapists, and like they know everything about all the psychological research and psychiatry and stuff, and then when you have issues, you
Mm.
go to the counselor or the therapist, and they have this expertise and they sort you out. That maybe that's what's going to happen, that the hope is that not that everyone's going to be good critical thinkers or anyone, but that there's just going to be that this is going to be a specialty that develops a clinical philosophy and
Yeah.
philosophical issues. Like we learn to distinguish what's like a psychological issue versus a philosophical issue, and that we
Right.
go to the clinical philosopher, and then those experts who are trained in it because that's what they like to do, that they would be the ones who would sort those issues. Like I think the gender debates, for instance, that would not be a debate if people understood this as a philosophical issue and not the issue that
Mm.
they think it is, like this people talking
Mm.
to each other. And so I am beginning, to wonder if that's going to be. And Nicholas Carr in the book, he's very negative because he says, "Oh, we're going to lose all of these critical thinking skills because of the internet." And he does consider one objection, which is, well, maybe our minds are going to work in such a way where critical thinking is not going to be a thing that we really need anymore because our world's going to be so different. He throws
Right.
that objection out, but I think that's where we're going. That's just not going to be a thing that's so important anymore. In which case, it might still be around, but it's gonna be more of almost like, it's gonna be obsolete, like writing calligraphy, where it's like, oh, that's cool
Yeah.
to do that, but it's not essential.
Yeah.
Because even now, today, you can have a whole career and you don't have to be a good critical thinker. Whereas in the past,
Right.
that wasn't as common. Like critical thinking was definitely more important to play more role. Now it's like you just,
Right.
in fact, if you think less critically, you'll do better. People read your articles,
Exactly.
so I
So
would
one,
yeah.
I think like my whole kind of just to be completely honest, is like I want to be part of the society that like thinks critically. Like if that means that I have to go move to a little island and or like invite all of my people out here to the desert, like that is like utopia for me. Like, and I just have to accept that for myself. But also, much more important than that, it's been in my head a lot recently. Trying to understand how many people are in the world. So I'm really excited to have my recording with Daniel tomorrow, because when we were checking in last week, he was talking about how hard it is for people to just fathom how many billions of people, how many millions of people there are on the planet. Just like our brains just aren't really meant to try and like have that kind of quantification. And so the only thing that me personally I can compare like the amount of humans to is like ants. And so when I see ants, I just think, oh, they make me creepy. They give me like the heebie-jeebies because there's so many of them, and that's just so many of them in this place. And so whenever I see like ant mounds, especially out here, I try and like associate humans with that and make this connection of like, this is how insignificant like my life is. It's just this one ant in this one pile in this one part of my driveway, instead of like all the other hundreds of thousands of ones that are out there. So that's one piece of this. And another is we were watching the news because my mom watches it every day. And they were talking about how Walmart had made some deal with TikTok, and how you will be able to watch TikTok, and basically they're using it as an advertisement. So you watch somebody doing a TikTok and you say, I want those pants, tap on it, and then you order the pants. And it just like immediately got me thinking of like some like Fifth Element style, like anime shit, where it's like, that's just how that's just how like the direction that society goes. Like if we're looking at these sci-fi movies that are like X number of years in the future, we see these people doing these like seemingly weird, like entertaining things where, whether we're talking about Logan's Run or whatever, it's like you get to like swipe through like actual people, or you see just people doing like weird with bright colors. And like me personally, watching sci-fi movies, it's just like, is that really like what the future is going to be like? But I see that transition happening. And to bring that back to like, the billions of people on Earth, it's like, if we have that many people, we can't have everybody doing this really tough thinking all of the time. Like that is just not the way that, like, I don't want a bunch of me's. I mean, I love myself, but like, fuck that. Like life is a lot more enjoyable when people aren't thinking so hard most of the time. So it kind of would make some sense that, yeah, I mean, I don't want to admit it, but yeah, there's going to be probably more people who aren't doing this mental heavy lifting than people who are.
Well, that's fine. I don't think everybody should be. I think the problem is that it's not considered a thing that should be valued. So of course,
Mm,
I mean, yeah, of course, everybody's not going to be critical thinking, and even I don't think everyone should be critically thinking. Life would be really crappy if we were. It's just that when we are making decisions, it should be valued that you make a decision well. That's what I'm
mhm,
concerned about, because
mhm,
that's why so many terrible things happen, because people aren't considering what other options exist. They're not
mhm,
considering another perspective. They're locked in one way of thinking, and they are willing to go to the death because of this way of thinking, which actually doesn't matter that much or doesn't have that much difference from another person who's standing right
mhm,
next to them. So my concern is that our quality of life is actually um, decreasing because of it. So and again, it's like, yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't think everyone's equipped to be great critical thinkers or whatever, but it's just
yeah,
for me, it's more of a concern that it's not considered something that should be valued, especially when now minor decisions actually have huge effects. So in the past,
mhm,
more local kind of ways of living. So if someone makes a bad decision, it affects that community, right? We live in such a connected world now that if you have one community, let's say one nation state, make a bad decision, this can have global effects. And that's
right,
actually why the environment is sucking right now. It's because
right,
one part of the world said, this is the way everybody has to live. And if not, you are a barbarian, non modern piece of shit. And so now
yeah,
everybody in the world is trying to live in this very specific way, which is ridiculously unsustainable, even for that small group of people to live that way.
yeah,
And with one bad mistake in terms of thinking what life should look like is globalized, and now the entire fucking planet is in peril. And so that's a good example of that's what happens when we don't value critical thinking, especially in the world
mhm,
so interconnected. And so that's my concern, that if we say, oh, gone to the wind with when it comes to who cares about how to make a good decision, it's just like,
mhm,
what do you mean it doesn't matter how you make a good decision? Like it should
mhm,
matter to you whether you thought things out well, not just
yeah,
for you, but because this is now going to have an impact on lots of other people. Maybe not the whole world, but lots of other people. And so this is scary to me. And also, there's something
right,
really scary to me about not caring about the quality of your own life, especially when we are inundated with like, take this medication, this medication, everyone's depressed, everyone anxious, blah blah blah. And it's like, unlike calligraphy, which can go obsolete and it's not going to affect our lives that much, critical thinking, I mean, thinking well, I mean, I think it's, like I said, I think it's very similar to, working your body well. It's not a coincidence that Socrates hung out at gyms. People used to think because Socrates was trying to pick up boys. Socrates actually was against having sex with your students. And in fact, one of the most beautiful dialogues on love and eroticism at the symposium, there's the famous Olympian Alcibiades. He's in love with Socrates, and he's like, Socrates, why won't you sleep with me? I am the sexiest, most handsome guy, athlete, in town. And then Socrates gives this beautiful speech where he starts delineating the different kinds of loves, and he makes a beautiful pun about with the word erotic and asking questions. And he's like, that's why you want to be around me. I make you ask questions, and I don't have answers. Blah blah blah. So the reason that Socrates hung out at gyms was because he thought people who understand the value of working something out and redeeming the subjective quality of that. So people, for instance, they would do the hard work on their body. They understand that all of this hard work pays off, because not just because you look good, but because there's this feeling that I am working my body the way that it should, assuming you're able-bodied, right? And so he said, I want to be around people who already have done that kind of exercise, and that just see if they can make the minor leap to do it with their mind. And so that's why he hung out in gymnasiums. He wanted to be around people who, first of all, they're young. And so these are people who are going to be more likely to deviate from the path that their parents set for them, which is just be rich, be a politician, blah, blah, blah. And he says, maybe young people are, if I show them the light, they'll see that there's more to life than money and being popular and being this and this, but that maybe you want to be a good person. So he goes to young people, and he goes to young people who are working out their body, because he was saying what I'm saying now, which is you have actual real positive effects from using your body as you should, and bad things happen when you don't use it like you should. And there's something similar with the mind. It's not like calligraphy or some other things that go obsolete, which is like, well, it's not, too bad, but if we lose this exercise of the mind, we are going to, I think, have a devastating nihilistic mode of life, which people are already seeing. People
Yeah.
spend their whole lives just watching entertainment, 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 drugs, 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 drinking, 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 buying shit, buying shit, buying shit. It's exactly what Nietzsche was saying when he was being optimistic. He said, we are the bridge unto ourselves. We can choose to transcend what we are, but we are also on the precipice of an extreme nihilism if we fall into this idea that we're going to buy things into happiness. He was afraid, actually, that when we let go of religion, that now we have nothing to fill the hole, that you need people who are going to think well to realize that there's a way to move beyond religion into something more positive. And he was afraid, actually. He said there's two sides to this coin. On the one hand, we can transcend ourselves. On the other hand, we can descend into something way more aggressive than when we were thinking religiously. And I think that's what he predicted exactly what's happening now, which is everybody is fucking empty and dead inside. And I think that, I'm always trying to tell people, do logical exercises. It's hard in the beginning, but there is a lot of fun in using your mind. It feels good.
Yeah.
It feels your brain is doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is working, not just constantly absorbing lots of information,
Yeah.
constantly entertaining yourself in this kind of super mundane way. I'm not against watching Netflix or whatever, but I'm just, that this can't be what our lives are like. And
Yeah.
many people should understand that, because a lot of people are feeling, not just because of COVID, a lot of people are feeling disconnected, depressed, anxious, stressed out, that they're struggling existentially, right, to decide what to do. They have everything, there's a really great book, Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. It's a bestseller. He wrote a book before that called Sapiens, the history of mankind. And so Homo Deus is the history of tomorrow. That's what he calls it. And he gives this beautiful argument. He says progress actually doesn't make people happier. Progress is independent of individual happiness. Progress is something that we say with respect to the species. Our species is making immense progress, but as we progress, we're going to care less and less about the individual happiness. And you made a good argument that in the past, things were harder. It was easier to die from basic shit, but people were very connected. People had very defined roles. People had, staying with the same people their whole lives. There was more meaning and purpose in their lives, even though they were struggling with things that we would now consider to be like, oh, that's basic shit, whatever. And he gives this argument that as this trajectory moves forward, we make the mistake of thinking that now we're going to be happier. And he says there are going to be fewer and fewer people who are happier. And he just kind of leaves it at that. Like, species improvement has nothing to do with individual improvement. You are just one ant among many. Who gives a shit if you're happy? It's about the species thriving, because from a biological point of view, that's what matters. You want the species to thrive. And so
Right.
as people who are those individual ants, we should be concerned about who gives a shit if we have all this progress and we can't stand waking up in the morning? We can't talk to a person next to us because who they voted for. We can't love this person anymore because of some pointless difference in our, like, how we think about things. Like, this is actually, this is an existential crisis. This is scary.
Yeah. On that note.
If you don't feel like killing yourself already.
Right. No, and what's funny is that, like, I dealt with a lot of shit today, like literal, because today was a compost day, and I basically haven't done any composting. Sorry. I haven't done any composting this month. And so it turns out, like, I had 6 buckets to clean, and then all of the poop, the dog poop, to pick up in the yard, plus, like, coffee grounds and, like, the table scraps. So just had, like, I filled up an entire bin. Thank goodness I got 2. But so it's a lot of time to think. And then I also had to, like, make more, like, pre-compost, like, stuff. So it's like all the shit stuff today. And so I, was just reflecting on stuff and reflecting on the year and how important composting has been for me, as far as thinking of, like, my purpose in life, and how, I mean, it's one thing, like, turning shit into dirt is just really, like, mind-blowing and amazing for me because I'm a modern woman. But also, I mean, just taking responsibility for how much shit I'm putting into the world. Like, I go from using, a flush toilet to my composting business, and, like, when I'm on my bucket, I'm like, oh, I can use all the toilet paper I want because I know that it's going to break down, or I know what I have to do in order to break it down. But if I'm on a flush toilet, I'm like, oh, I don't want to clog the thing. I don't know if this is I don't know what's gonna happen. It's like a really
Yeah.
kind of funny, like, not so much dilemma, but it's a funny thing to think about. But it's something that, since people are so disconnected from that process, whether we're talking about our shit or, other trash that we make, since people are so disconnected from that process, it's just not even, tied into what they think they're doing with their life, what they're considering they're doing with their life. It's just like, well, no, that's just, is it Monday? I need to take the garbage to the curb. Like, what are we talking about? Kind of thing. But yeah, hopefully people don't want to, like, give up on existing here at the end. I love you.
I love you too. We should have ended on a more positive note, but it's.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well.